You brought up this whole idea about this existing consumer base all over the world. And I think we know that people have been consuming cannabis forever. What I don't have a good grasp on is what a transition from a largely illicit market will be in some of these countries to a more regulated market. And it's been really painful in the US. We've seen most of the market remain in the unregulated channels, and it's this constant push and pull and enforcement. There's varied opinions about the best way to do that and what criminalization is appropriate or not appropriate when you legalize a plant, even though people are doing it outside of the legal framework. How do you see that unfolding in the countries that you think are going to be the biggest consumer opportunities? You mentioned Australia and Germany. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I think that's a really super important question. And I see it as chaos because that's what we've endured in the US. And I think it's challenging, right? Because if you just completely deschedule this plant and allowed full access across the board with very minimal regulation, what we would find is a massive market. We would find a growing market. We would find a lot of happy consumers. You would find probably moderate pricing stability. But I think you would also find a lot of product that's unsafe. And if you look at the hemp market in the US, it's a litmus test. We can see what that looks like. The hemp market has been pretty much unregulated for 2 or 3 years now. And you see a lot of products that consumers should not be consuming. And so we need to have a certain amount of regulation so that we can have safe, consistent products that are medicine for millions of people. And so that amount of regulation is basically a governor on the adoption and let's just call it the adoption cycle of this amazing plant. And I think no one has figured out the right recipe. It's super complicated. If you look in Germany, where they're filling vapes one at a time at the pharmacy, which is what they've been doing, it's silly, right? And then you look at Thailand, where they just blew the doors wide open and most of the products in the market were untested. Although our products there, we made sure that everything was tested, and that's what we touted from the very beginning. It's pretty chaotic. None of us were around when alcohol was legalized again in the 30s. And so we don't really know whether it took 10 or 20 years for it to really shift away from these backwoods distilleries to a fully regulated, safe market. But I think for us, we just have to realize that it's going to be a bit chaotic, and we just have to do the best we can. And for anybody that's actually in the industry and operating in the industry, it's a bucking bronco. You just got to hang on for dear life, and you got to make sure that you don't make bad decisions and that you navigate through it very carefully. We do it at Sunderstorm in a way where we take as much information and data as we can possibly absorb, and we throw it against the wall, and then we argue for hours. It gets a little intense at times, but I'm a leader that basically values the opinions of my team and my colleagues, and we debate things endlessly. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've avoided some of the pitfalls that other companies have not avoided. We certainly have made mistakes. I wish I hadn't made those mistakes, but this industry is really difficult. And to be able to navigate through this is incredibly challenging. I don't see that it's going to be any different. And I'll tell you a funny story. When we entered Thailand back in 2022, we got up and running, we were selling products. And every time I talked to someone about Thailand, they said, "Oh my God, but I keep hearing it's going to be rescheduled. It's very chaotic. And how do you deal with that?" And I said, "I started in California." So California was incredibly chaotic back in the day. And I was running from the cops every day, hiding our facility back in 2015. It's just the nature of this industry. And one of the things that those of us in the industry have to do is we have to work better together to drive it in a direction that makes sense. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement there. And how do you do that on a global basis when the European markets want to be highly regulated, and Australia as well? It's challenging, but I think we just need to keep destigmatizing the plant and letting people recognize that there are different value propositions and uses of this plant. And there are some very highly medical uses, and there are some recreational uses. And then there's a blend in the middle. And That's what makes this plant so complex. I don't know. That's not really a good answer to your question, but I think it's just something that we need to drive forward. And as companies, and CEOs just have to do the best you can to make good decisions.